Okay, we will move on to our final question. So I think something really cool, and this actually segues our conversations moving along nicely, um, allowing people to define themselves, right, and decide what they want to happen in their places is really important for having projects and things that work, and having local people invest in what is happening in their communities. That's part of what looking at Appalachia wanted to do, right? Like let people describe themselves rather than be described by a governmental agency or by media who only show part of the story and not all of the story. So can you guys, and we'll start at this end with Roger, that'll be lovely. Um, but how do you think the project succeeded in this goal? And how have people in your work, and Roger, this wasn't like, I mean, you can answer part of this question as you want, but how have people in your work defined themselves in comparison to overgeneralizations and stereotypes of Appalachia?
Well, I think, I'm happy with I tend not to look at the project as successful or unsuccessful. I'm very happy with the conversations that we've been able to foster around this idea of representation and the number of college kids that I've been able to engage with and high school kids and just people, complete strangers that email me and say the kindest things or even some critical things. The project is still very much a work in progress. There are some faults and shortcomings with it, as there would be with any. But to stay mindful of those is something that I try to do, and that one of the things that I was talking with a student earlier. She was interviewing me for a homework assignment, and I mentioned to her that we need to have a broader representation of minorities, people of color. I would love to see more women photographers represented, their work represented in what we've collected, and we'll get there. I believe we'll get there as long as we continue to move forward with the project. But I'm incredibly proud to be associated with such a fine organization of photographers and thinkers and movers and shakers. And all I did was just sort of float the idea, and then it very quickly became something much bigger than any of us. And it's been a real honor to be part of that. But I'm not one that subscribes to the idea that we give a voice to anyone. We all have voices. Everyone that we come in contact with has a voice. But if we can use different vehicles to amplify that voice and use agency to, amplify and embolden that voice, that's what I want to continue to try to do with this project. And then part two of the question was?
I think that's it.
Okay.
Actually, one of the other images that I had thought that I found really compelling, really, I think speaks to this, is number 11. Yes. So I don't know if on this side whether you can see the caption on it, but just taken in Allegheny County in Pennsylvania, and this one struck me as really speaking to that issue of how this project kind of speaks to those overgeneralizations, because I think when people say Appalachia, they immediately think rural and they think white, right, exclusively. And this is, greater Pittsburgh, right? So it's urban. We don't have, racially homogenous group of kids here. And I think this really speaks to the diversity of the region, both geographically, ethnically, racially, in a lot of ways. So I think just one example of several in the exhibit that I think show us that the region is much bigger than we think it is. I think we tend to, in fact, I remember saying something in a class once years ago, well, Pittsburgh is Appalachia too. And, a student from Pittsburgh taking great umbrage at that. No, Pittsburgh is not Appalachia. And I think because, it's urban, it's a big city. It's not West Virginia, but it is.
Capital.
What's that?
Capital of Appalachia, right?
Yes, the Paris of Appalachia. Right, so it doesn't have Parisian too.
Unless you're a Reds fan.
Yeah.
Well, I think I could go to my pictures now. And so to play off of what Rosemary just said about the diversity that the exhibit shows, actually, if you can fast forward first to the last one, 17, because then we'll work our way back. Yeah, that one. Yeah, so I thought that this was a really neat picture. NPA, Nationality Days is what it says. And I think that, I remember when I worked at PBS learning about this community in just south of Clarksburg where there were, Spanish-speaking people who only spoke Spanish because their families, had come from Spain to work in this factory. And I think this reminded me of that, that there are these pockets of these diverse communities with really interesting stories, interesting backgrounds. And then if we go to the 16, so this is, I think, just another kind of example of like somebody you might not expect to see in Appalachia. I think she's got dreadlocks and, tattoo. And so I think that these two pictures speak to diversity, but this one also speaks to community for me because it's Pocahontas County, West Virginia, which is where when I first came to West Virginia, that's where I lived. And there is an amazing sense of community there. And, not being raised in Appalachia and coming first to Pocahontas County, West Virginia, it was so obvious to me how genuine people were and how strong the tie to the community and to the place was. And it was just really beautiful. And then the picture just before this is also Pocahontas County. And, this is the West Virginia that I was introduced to. This is the Appalachia that I was introduced to. And it's beautiful. It's breathtaking. And it was unlike any place that I grew up. I think somebody said before, you take for granted when you're here that you look out and you have these beautiful views. I think it was Mary Kay who said that. And I never took it for granted on my drive to work every day, that I was like surrounded by just this beautiful landscape. And then if we keep going, Contra dancing, this was another picture that I pulled out because, again, this is about community and this is about tradition. And I think those are two things that people who are from Appalachia hold dear, is the sense of community and special traditions that are really tied to this culture. And then the last picture I'll reference and talk about is this one. This is actually one of my favorite pictures right here. There's so much information in this picture from just the different objects and the people sitting there waiting, for their hair to be cut. Maybe they're not waiting. Maybe they're just hanging out in barbershops. That happens too sometimes. And then it's the man, the look on his face. He's in his 90s. Yeah, 91 years old. It just reminded me of places I've been when I've been out and reporting, and I also think it's really cool how the photographer took the picture. You don't see the photographer in the picture, but you think you might because of the mirror. So I think it's also just a really neat picture. And so all those pictures together, just to me, help show what Appalachia is from what my experience from living here and from interviewing people and doing stories and what people tell me about, this place and what friends, who were born and raised here, how they describe this place. I feel like all those pictures represent that. And all those pictures aren't pictures, that you're necessarily going to see from the outside. Those aren't. And so in that way, yeah, I think this project did what it set out to do. And I think, good job. I think it's really a great project. And you said earlier, I wanted to create conversation with this project, and I wanted to bring these images to a wider audience, and check mark on both of those. I think you've done that, so it's really good.
I agree with that. I feel like actually the picture that one of the pictures that it's just gone. Oh, number 22. That's just a woman in a field, and I was thinking about because I have a picture of my mother, my sister gathering daisies in a field, and her daughter gathering daisies in a field when she was a kid. And so I feel like what this project does beautifully is show the importance of family. I keep seeing that, family and portraits. And I was just thinking about what is, I don't know your name, I'm sorry, but what you said about the importance of a culture. And I was just thinking the one thing I would love to see more of, to me, having grown up here, we always had this term called Appalachian make-do, where essentially we're pragmatists, like we can make things work. And that's the one thing I'd like to see more of, just because that's actually a hallmark of the culture for me. My dad fixes a car with a toothpick, so.
So I wanted to end my last picture, which is 26, suitably called the end. But I wanted to go the opposite way. Pun intended. I wanted to go the opposite way of the expected, because that's part of what this was about. That the vistas are what people think of. One of the things people primarily think of. And this is different than a vista. It's more personal. It's more closed in. And that actually corresponds more closely to my impression of West Virginia. People live in the hollers. They go up on the mountaintops and get a view. They live in the hollers. They work in the hollers. You don't work on the mountaintop. You work down at the base of the mountain. That's where things start from. And I also was thinking about this project, and this project is art. And it's important that it's art, because art and symbolism, symbology, say much more than just mere words. That art moves the spirit of people. And it's part of why art is important in bringing the message, because it has to move your spirit. And this is, I think, one of the most artistic pictures in the package. It's really well defined. It's using sort of a golden mean here to divide the picture up, which is a classical way. And it's a classical pose. I mean, this could be a Rubens, right? And it's so against the grain in some ways that the contrast again stands out, like the other pictures that I was talking about, always looking for the contrast between the green and the white. Again, that was here. And it points to the central figure, which is the humanity. And it is the humanity in the nature that is the symbol of West Virginia. And finally, just one little thing. My other experience of West Virginia is West Virginia has always seemed to be very matriarchal. And that's why I wanted to choose this picture.
It's awful hard to follow him. My God. How do you compete, right? I'm much less artistic, much less poetic.
You need the diversity.
And I was glad that Roger pointed out that he would like to see more diversity in this, more sort of people of color, people and I kept thinking of immigrants. I mean, we have this image of, and it's always you get in a crowd of people and you ask, so what's the ethnic background of Appalachia? And they'll say, oh, 85% Scots-Irish. That's I mean, it's clearly not true, and it's never been true. I've worked in the 19th and early 20th centuries for much of my historical career, and places like Clarksburg, you were in the end of the 19th century more likely to hear French spoken on the streets than English in certain neighborhoods. In places like Weirton, there's this incredible mix of immigrants and people in the southern coal fields. A lot of southern-born African Americans as well as Italians and Hungarians. And so, I guess, and even today, in places like Morganton, North Carolina, where you have large numbers of Nicaraguan immigrants that, were fleeing, and Guatemalan immigrants that were fleeing, civil war in their homelands and working in chicken processing plants. And so I want to see that Appalachia represented because it's a very dynamic part, and it's not just Pennsylvania. And it is interesting because the couple other things that came to mind as people were talking. One is the sort of artificial construction of Appalachia, the Appalachia that Alyssa showed at the very beginning, a map of that region. It comes about in the 1960s. This is not it's not a region connected by climate or topography or anything else. It's a region that sort of tried to take advantage of the war on poverty. And so you have Mississippi and Alabama and places like that are very different, as well as Pennsylvania and into New York. And yet now it has, as a result of the Appalachian Regional Commission, it has become the way in which we define Appalachia. And this photo project really captures that. Photo 12, this shuttered factory town in New York, is now part of Appalachia, as well as the one that I showed earlier, 18, which is this eastern panhandle of West Virginia, and also 21, this rural tent meeting in Kentucky. There's all of this is Appalachia, and I think that that's important. But I also think that, and I'll sort of end my unpoetic part by saying, that it's also interesting to me that and this is something that Roger hinted at when he said Appalachia. There's northern Appalachia and southern Appalachia, and we sort of force them together, but in some sense they see themselves very differently. Most northern Appalachians don't consider them, as Rosemary pointed out, don't consider themselves Appalachian at all, and so there's a great deal of complexity in the way in which we put this region together that we're not going to be able to sort out. But I think it's an important first step to get all of these images, and I hope that as the project continues, it captures more of those newcomers to the region as well. There's the South Asian immigrants, South American immigrants that are an important part of the dynamism or potential dynamism of the region.
Anybody have comments or thoughts on this part of it you'd like to share, or a question you'd like to ask?
Someone.
I'd just like to comment that I really like the green discussion. I lived in Illinois for 3 years, and coming home to West Virginia, that was always the first thing that I would get out of the car and I'd be like, it's so green here. And it's not like they don't have trees in Illinois. It's just you don't see them in the same way you do here. So I really appreciated that. And I also was going to say that I really like the idea of taking photographs and sending media out from the state of positive things. One of the very common refrains when I was a kid and we'd go on road trips would be my parents saying things like, look, they have, trailer parks here. Oh, look, they have
banjos.
It's not, just our region. It's throughout the country. And by focusing on the forest regions here, you miss all of the really good things that you're getting from other places around the country. And I have to think that would help with when businesses are considering, well, do we move our factory to West Virginia where there are people living in huts, or do we move to, South Carolina where there's a beach, that kind of discussion. So the kind of, and not ignoring the problems here, but making sure that people realize it's not just a wilderness. There are people here, and there are lots of good things going on around the state.
I just have a comment, and maybe it's kind of a random comment, but when I came here in 2002 from California for a job interview, I was picked up in Pittsburgh at the airport, and we were driving down, the interstate, and there were two things I noticed. There were a lot of dead deer. And I'm going, wow, there's a lot of dead deer here. But we were driving along, and I was talking to the driver, who was, probably in his 60s or something. And it was in May, and in the median in the interstate were all of these wildflowers. And I said, wow, those are really beautiful wildflowers. And he says, yeah, those are ladybirds wildflowers. And it just struck me, when we were talking, how much this area is defined by the war on poverty and LBJ and that era. That was his response to me. Those are ladybirds. She had the "Make America Beautiful." Wasn't that what it was? Yeah.
That whole adage of John L. Lewis, JFK, and Jesus Christ. Those are 3 pictures you could find in every home.
Right, exactly. But that was his response to me, and I thought, whoa, that's amazing.
Oh, it was going to be a tongue-in-cheek comment about wishing you luck deciding on the 2 regulations that you may axe this evening for the one that you may pass. I don't know. Good luck. I don't know.
The industry's trying to axe the regulation.
Right, exactly. Well, I know, but I wasn't sure if you were going to pass a new one. Yeah.
Are there any other comments or thoughts?
Going to the whole, not really knowing, you have culture or anything in your town. For the longest time, I just thought my hometown of Evans, Jackson County, West Virginia, and Ripley, where I went to high school at, was just a pit stop between Parkersburg and Charleston. That had 16 gas stations. That was it. Nothing else was really coming into the town. It was just becoming a big gas station. But just, I don't know, in recent years, just going back now and everything, after being away for a good bit, I've just been noticing and seeing a lot more things than I had before. And just your comment about that really stuck with me. But we still just have 16 gas stations. Why?
Yeah. But that's an interesting question. Why?
Yeah, I am why do we have 16 gas stations? That's weird.
Is that better or worse than 16 snake handler churches?
I would prefer the snake handler churches because it's more interesting than just.
But do they employ more people, right?
Yeah, see, that's the thing you could argue with the gas stations. There's jobs there and they're employing, but okay, getting a little sidetracked. Before we had all those gas stations, we were trying to get businesses maybe Applebee's or something like that to come in there. Maybe because since we are basically a pit stop between Parkersburg and Charleston, getting those types of places would actually build up the town and make more people want to stop off and actually maybe stay a bit, maybe get some more hotels in. But all that stuff fell through. So I think, oh wow, just answered my question. So
Yeah, that's beautiful.
So since all that stuff fell through due to different situations, I was like a kid, so I don't know all the reasons behind that. Like it started focusing on gas stations and really quick pit stop
So
type
the
things.
fallback measure was.
Yeah, but in doing so for the town, it might have brought jobs, but not the type of jobs that I personally thought my town needed.
That's West Virginia in a nutshell.
Yeah.
I'll put in a plug for a resource here at the library, the West Virginia History on View historical photographs collection. If you've never looked at that, that's something I really like to use in class because I can't remember. Somebody can probably say what they're like 50 or 60,000 photographs up there now.
At least,
Yeah. And if you go in and just on the basic search engine and type in Ripley, I think you'll be astounded at the number of pictures that show up, and it's really interesting to see what was there before those gas stations and what happens to the places. It's a really quick and fascinating way to kind of uncover that history.
I think we might have time for one more comment or question, if anybody wants to, before it's time to wrap up.
No.
Yeah. No, Thea.
Okay, I just wanted to ask, we've been focusing so much on bringing to light the positive things in West Virginia and sort of overlooking the negative in a way, and I've been sitting here bristling against that because I don't want that to be overlooked because that's my experience of West Virginia, and I feel like that's being lost. And in what ways do you think we can bring or make the negative things bring out the positive in those instead of just overlooking at them and looking them and seeing them as culturally important rather than as being social pariahs to the rest of the country?
Sure. That's a great question, and one that I wish I had a more well-rounded answer for. I mean, I can tell you that the exhibit that's on display here is comprised of 75 photographs. I think online we'll probably have over 300 now. And so, and some of the photographs that are in the exhibit here do address those issues. I mean, there's at least one that I'm aware of that deals with addiction, and there's a couple that deal with top of the homeland and those sorts of things. But I certainly don't think that we are anywhere near where we need to be in terms of having more of those images. It's really just taking our time to navigate how best to do that and not fall prey to feeding into what people think they already know. But I also don't want to just shy away from issues that because that does just as much disservice to the region and to the project and to the people as only showing the good stuff, you know. So that's a great question.
And what I was trying to do with the first two pictures that I showed was talk about contrast, because I think it's really important to talk about the problems, and because those who forget history will repeat it. We don't want to do that, but at the same time, we don't want to say poor us. We want to say, yes, this has happened, but in contrast to that, here's what we've been doing about it. And as much as possible, I like those pictures that seem to be this study in contrast, because I think it's that contrast that really defines this area. Stark contrasts. Really, the Freedom Industries picture is probably the best one, although the paper mill doesn't do a bad job of it, both symbolically and actually, showing this contrast between the sunset sky and the industry plant, which is a pulp mill. which has its problems both in air and water and solid waste.
I think that's a really beautiful question to end on because you speak to the importance of showing the diversity of the region, whether it's in romantic pictures of people outside or environmental pollution and other issues. That I love the question that you had over there. Every area faces, right? Trailer parks aren't just in West Virginia. Mountaintop removal mining is not just in West Virginia and Appalachia. And I think that understanding that there's diversity across the region, just like there is across the country, is really important. I think this project does a really great job of taking some good steps and important steps in showing who we are and how we're here.
But she's right. There has to be a certain amount of ownership of the problems as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
That we are part of the problem.
That's what I'm saying. Yeah. That's part of the diversity.
Right.
Is that there are problems here and that we can address them effectively, even though they're entrenched oftentimes.
And I'll also add that we last year we did sort of a soft launch with expanding the project to include writing and video and audio as well, so that folks who wanted to one of those veins of storytelling could contribute as well. And so, but because we're all volunteer and this is all a passion, project of passion that we do, we're not able to devote as much time to it as we would really like to. But the writing team is about to launch the writing piece of this, and I think that'll also be a really powerful way of exploring some of the more complex and nuanced issues, and we'll be able to add these different layers of telling those stories by being able to hear someone crying because they lost a loved one to heroin overdose. And my daughter's in college outside of Asheville, and she's a senior. In the 4 years that she's been in school, she's lost 5 friends to heroin. And that's not, Wyoming County, West Virginia. That's Buncombe County, North Carolina, and Asheville. That's, but that's a hard story to tell just in photographs or just in writing. And I think if we're able to truly build out the project in the way that we would like to, we can deliver a deeper, hopefully more moving, complete picture of something.
All right, wonderful. Let's give our panelists